Envisiontech podcast. This week I'm going to be talking about how teaching can actually help you learn. I have actually been teaching in one form or another now for a long time. Even when I was, I think, around 11 or 12, as I mentioned in a previous episode, there was this thing called a Braille note, which was essentially a Braille device that would let you read Word documents. And even back when I was quite young, I remember I was part of helping teachers in Ireland actually learn how to use it. So I've had a lot of experience teaching one way or another. I also led an accessibility workshop where we would talk about different assistive technologies, and it was actually with other blind people, and I would kind of talk to them about how they could use certain things, or if they were wondering how something worked, I would go away for the week, come back, and then next week I would then talk to them about it. When I first joined college, as I mentioned previously, I was in the Access program, and I was a PAL leader, or a peer-assisted learning leader, which essentially what would happen is during the week, the students would have their regular classes, and then I think my sessions were on Saturday. I would then essentially do an extra class with them. It was kind of to go over what they had already done that week, but it was also to help them learn maybe some new things. We would give them some challenges and things like that, and also just help them learn. I know that when I actually did them, like when I was a student there, they were really helpful. I've done loads of different presentations on assistive technology and accessibility in different organizations, just the different events. Even in school, I talked about that quite a bit. And now I actually teach programming, like personally, as part of my business. So I've been teaching for quite a long time, and it's honestly been really interesting because, as I mentioned at the start, I feel like that teaching people has actually helped me learn a lot over the years and helped me get better at things like programming. It has definitely helped me a lot. As I mentioned, I was a PAL leader, and when I first started doing that, actually, to be quite honest, I didn't do very well. I actually didn't prepare properly for the lessons. So when I showed up, I was a bit lost as to what exactly I was supposed to be doing. I thought it was going to be really easy, that I would just show up and everything would be fine. But with teaching, actually, it does require a bit of, I don't want to say work beforehand, but it does, because you need to plan out what you're going to talk about. You need to kind of think about any things that you want the students to do, like if you have an exercise for them to do. And because you're doing this, you need to understand it better, especially because when you're there, somebody might ask you a question, and sometimes you might not know the answer, and that's fine, but a lot of the time, you're supposed to know the answer. So in programming, if we're doing a beginner class and I'm talking to somebody about variables, which if you don't know what those are, don't worry about it. But if they ask me a question about them, then I should be able to answer it, especially, right then and there when it's a beginner topic. Obviously, it's a bit more advanced. You might not know everything about it off the top of your head. But, I failed to actually prepare for those classes. So I actually then realized that when you are teaching, there is a good bit of work that you need to put in beforehand to prepare things, which is why I think it's helped me learn a lot, especially about programming, and why I don't just know how to program today, but I also understand how things work. And as I mentioned, actually teaching programming as well has helped me learn, because I might be teaching something and doing some research on it, and I'll realize, oh wow, that's actually how that works, or I'll read something new about it, or whatever it might be. It also kind of makes me keep up with what's going on, because when I'm teaching programming, they're not learning when I learned, so things might be different now. So I have to go and check. I have to go do some research. I have to see, has anything changed since I last looked at this? So it also helps me stay kind of up to date on what's happening as well. It's also really interesting because sometimes the students will actually help you understand better. For example, I've actually been helping my wife learn programming, and sometimes she'll ask me a question and I'm like, oh yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. That is probably why that is called that, or why it works like that or whatever it might be, or maybe it'll even just be a new analogy that somebody uses to describe how something works, and it kind of just clicks, and I'm like, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. As I've mentioned, I've gone to college and I've been in a more individual sort of lesson scenario. And certainly for me and in my experience, individual lessons are probably better. And I know that I've definitely done my majority of learning through those, or I've also learned the most from teaching those as well. Um, Part of the reason is just because you can have a particular goal with an individual lesson, or even if it's a small group. The group might have a goal, which might be to build a website using certain technologies. And that's great for me as a teacher because I have something to work towards that they want to do. And also, it's great for the students, which, as I said, I was, because they get to actually learn about what they want. It's not so broad, it's quite focused and targeted. Um, Everybody also learns in a different way, so individual or small group lessons are really great for that. Because if you have 100 students, you're probably not going to be able to cater to all of their learning needs. Whereas if you have one or like five, even, then you're probably going to be able to do that, at least way better than if you have a huge group. You also have more of a chance to clarify for students or for students to get clarification. And even if you're a teacher, you might be able to spend more time clarifying things with students about a question that they asked or something that they want to make, for example. For me, definitely it has been better, and especially because I'm blind, in a bigger setting, often I don't necessarily get what I need in terms of teaching because perhaps the lecturer or the teacher just has a PowerPoint and they're just standing up there kind of going through it. And I'm sitting there like, okay, this is great. They're talking about this code, but I can't read it because it's in a PowerPoint. So I'm just going to sit here and not know what's going on. So I feel like individual lessons are good. For most people, anyway, I feel like they're quite good. In bigger classes, which are usually in a school or a university, you also usually have a curriculum, which is usually less targeted towards the individuals in the class. But it also does help because it helps you learn a bit of everything. So it's not quite as targeted, it's usually a bit more broad. Um, and it usually has a pace that most people can follow. Now, sometimes that's a problem because it's too fast for some people or it's too slow for others. So some people will get bored, whereas some people will get left behind. Obviously, that doesn't happen with an individual lesson. But, in general, it will cater to most people. For me in university, as I've kind of already mentioned, I would have problems where maybe there'd be a PowerPoint going on, or even we might get an assignment or some kind of notes, and they would just be full of images, or we might be required to do something more visual, and that wouldn't work for me. But obviously, that wouldn't happen if I was on a more individual lesson. Um, and the thing is, I would actually have to spend extra time with lecturers outside of class. I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, one of my lecturers, he was really great, and he would actually spend basically two labs as opposed to one, because he would do one lab with the rest of the class, and I think I would usually be there, but I wouldn't usually do much. I'd just kind of be waiting. And then afterwards, he would then do a whole nother, hour or two lab. The lab was usually 2 hours, but sometimes we'd get it done quicker, with me, and that's great. But honestly, he shouldn't have to do that, and I also shouldn't have to do that. And then not even that, but outside of that, I would also have to do more work myself. So, as I mentioned before as well, there was another class where I spent 12 weeks instead of learning anything trying to get a piece of software to work. And I spent loads of time outside of this class working with other people in the university who were actually really helpful and really great. They were actually trying really hard to make things work for me. But essentially, nothing came out of those 12 weeks. So I invested loads of time, and quite a few other people did, and essentially nothing came out of it, which obviously takes away from my other classes. But again, that wouldn't have happened if it was an individual or smaller group, because we probably just would have used a different piece of software. For me, in a weird way, teaching has been one of the ways in which I've learned the most, which might sound kind of counterintuitive, but once you have that kind of foundation of something, if you start teaching it, all it's going to do is help you learn even better. And even from talking to my classmates, maybe helping them understand something, or even if they were trying to help me understand something, both of us would usually learn something. I might ask them a question that they don't know the answer to, or maybe it would take them a minute to figure out the answer, or vice versa. And we'd both usually come away from that learning more about the topic that we were talking about. So that is going to be it for this week. Thank you for joining me again. And again, I've been your host, Paul Gagan.